Alright, y'all, hello again. I'm your nature-based coach, Raynelle, continuing on the Q&A portion of our restorative accountability workshop. Today, we're really gonna be talking about relationships. This Q&A portion is really sort of the makeup or breakup the relationship and how to navigate those things. So again, on the Jamboard, which is linked in the description, we're going to go through the sort of pinkish notes. I grouped those together because they have a lot to do with just navigating the relationship in general. So the main questions that we have today are: one, how do you decide if a relationship is worth repairing? And when do you let people go? Second question is, what if the relationship can't be restored? And last that we're going to cover today is, how do you manage when recovery/repair is not sincere, or healing frameworks are weaponized through passive aggressiveness, gaslighting, or quotes, competitive healing? So as you can see, we'll be discussing how to navigate these sticky parts of a relationship. I want to remind you, I am your nature-based leadership coach. I don't specifically call myself a relationship coach, although I do use, aspects of my coaching to support healthy relationships and cultivating those healthy relationships with others and healthy relationships with yourself. So let's get to it. I want to head into this material, and I have to say it isn't part of any particular pathway that I suggest in the workbook, but these are really big ones that tend to come up when we do talk about accountability, right? So I want to offer as much as I can as I interpret how best I can interpret these questions. I will offer what I can as a coach for you to think about and consider when you're in these situations. So let's begin with the first one. How do you decide if a relationship is worth repairing, and when do you let people go? So in my interpretation of this question, it's really trying to understand by what measure are you deciding, how do we decide if this is worth going towards the recovery and repairing the relationship after accountability was held, and perhaps maybe there's a decision there. Is it worth going through and retaining this relationship? Do we make up or break up? And when do we break up, right? That could be a matter of the timing, if this person means like the time, how do we know in the timing? But I often experience that the challenge with the breakup is like, how do we do that? How do we have that conversation? So in my response today with this first question is really understanding what a healthy relationship is for you. We all have our needs that are like, in order to feel like I belong to this relationship, like I belong in this, that I'm in reciprocity of things that are, that my values are being honored, and I'm having my needs met, and it's reciprocal in that way. I would begin by really defining for yourself what your needs are to be in a healthy relationship with others. One thing I want to add as far as being in organizational work within your agency or a team, I often guide clients through the consideration that they see the actual agency that they're in, the actual organization that they work with as its own relationship. Like, you relate to this agency to this organization in a particular way. And what is that like? Is that a healthy relationship? And oftentimes that process leads to understanding an individual's core values. We can talk about, all of us have a value set, right? And within the values that we live by are connected the needs that honor that value. So if I value reciprocal communication, the need might be that I like check-ins frequently and often about what's going on, right? So I would think about your individual values, starting with maybe like a list of 10 values that you carry with you, no matter where you work. If there are different value sets within an intimate relationship or partner versus like a work relationship, then start thinking about those values. And let's say if you start with 10, start paring it down to actually 5 core values, or a small handful that are sort of your deal breakers, right? So if these values don't exist within the relationship, then it's a no-go for me, right? So for the most part, in my response to understanding the worth of a relationship going through repairing, if I go forward with the repairing, can I have my values honored, or see that some of them are my needs are met, and based on whether that is there or not, deciding whether you're aligned with this relationship or not. And speaking on the terms of a relationship with an individual, it's really about that dialogue of what you need to feel safe, seen and heard. And really, in the work of my nature-based coaching, I shared that model in which I talked about this work being holistic and honoring a person's wholeness. So looking at what things connect you to being whole. Do these values align with that sense of wholeness? And is this relationship a reflection of that as well? And if there aren't things that are completely aligned, the worth is really talking about, like, is it possible to work on bringing us closer into alignment, or making agreements in which the compromise is not taking away from you, but adding to your value in general, and what you need to be in healthy relationship with others. The question about when to let a person go is going to be kind of tethered to some of that reflection and thinking about whether values are aligned here in that relationship, if needs can be met or worked on to a certain degree. And in general, the ending of a relationship, first of all, I want to say, like, sometimes somatically we get that hit before we get like an emotional or an intellectual, no, this doesn't work for me anymore, right? So all of those parts of you that you have access to, that you can check in with, oftentimes the situation itself will show you that this relationship is done. What we have here, how we are in each other's path, and what we can offer to each other no longer exists. Maybe this sort of emotional or spiritual contract is done. I got what I need, you got what you need, or we reached a point where we can no longer be on the same path together. So intuitively that can happen. Somatically, you can get that gut feeling that this doesn't feel right. Those are ways that you could access for yourself and your awareness of like when you know it's time to sever the relationship, separate from the relationship. Letting go is a whole other body of work, right? And there can be a lot of things that come up for the individual in just the act of letting someone go. So I always suggest like deep reflection on what your relationship to breakups, breaking up, like was it, what feelings are coming up when you have to let somebody go? Are there any other things that maybe you can check in with as far as yourself and what you may be carrying in the need to stay? And if that is influencing any of your thoughts of wanting to let go of this relationship. But I often experience situations, and I have myself, where I've hung on way too long, did not pay attention to the signs, but had to give myself grace, you know, like it in some situations, the emotions sit more present than the physical or intellectual letting go that needs to happen. So spending some time in really understanding who you are and your core values, and whether this relationship is aligning to who you are and the needs that you have, and deciding from there whether it's time to have that breakup conversation or not, and paying attention to that. Like if I do let this person go, and I can imagine that, what would that feel like? Not so much like what would happen, but check in first with like, would that bring levity to me? Would that bring more space? Or would that really put more burden on me emotionally in this decision? There's so many ways to gauge what your boundaries are in a relationship. So one beginning before even talking about healthy boundaries is to really get clear on what your values are, and if there are needs that need to be met that are connected to those values, and trusting yourself in your gut that you would know when it's really time to let go. And if you have had that situation of hanging on too long, then that's a pathway to really understand what really happened there for myself to keep me tethered to this relationship when I knew that it was time to go. That's also opportunity for some self-awareness. And you have opportunity. This won't be the only relationship that you have that's going to meet a challenge, right? So the more and more we have opportunities to practice aligning to our value sets, requesting that our needs be met and honored, the more and more we can see ourselves in relationships that do work for us. All right, and the second question could be kind of related to the first, but this really is a very straightforward, what if the relationship can't be restored? And basically, I'm hearing that as like, okay, what if I come to a place where it's time to break up? I can't, there is no pathway for restoration here. How do we proceed? I sense that where the challenge lies is needing to let go and not have that relationship anymore because there was no pathway to move forward. So it really is like, what if we have to break up? So what is happening there internally with the knowing that it's time to sever this relationship? This is really the evaluation of what it means to not have a relationship anymore. At least for me, this is how I am interpreting this. I'm at a point where I know this no longer can be restored anymore. One aspect of this is like, now that I know I have to break up, how does that make me feel? How am I sitting with that? What is coming up for me in knowing that the next step is not going to have this relationship? The other aspect of this question brings up the idea that what does restored mean? Are we trying to get this relationship back to what it was? Sometimes relationships can remain with the particular person, but we're relating to them in a different way now. So what are we restoring here? Are we restoring the way it was, or are we looking towards maybe creating a new way of relating to each other? And that's could be a possibility of restoration. So this is kind of something that is a little juicy for me as a coach, right? Just unpacking this question of what if a relationship can't be restored. It might not go back to what it was, but it can possibly be something different. I want you to consider maybe a situation where, maybe accountability was held, something new was learned about each other that gives some insight that there has been some change that has happened in this person. Maybe there's a new sense of an identity that now comes into the room, and the part of the restoration is that we can't restore to who they were before, but maybe we can work on towards who you are now. So as the juicy part of the coach is like really embracing if there's possibly change here that we're working with. So I'm really talking about, this question leading up to like, what if the relationship can't be restored, but I still have to be in relationship with this person, right? Maybe consider that what we might be restoring is the evolution of each other, right? Or bringing in those possibilities. Could it be possibly that we're not going back to how it was, but we need to think about different ways of relating to each other? I think this is a question that kind of opens up so many possibilities here, right? But, if this really was where you are at, if you did ask this question on the Jamboard, please provide that clarity of, maybe even offering an example that you want to get a little bit more curious about. But for me, there's multiple ways that we can think about, the breakup. Are we completely breaking up because it can't be restored in any way? Like, are we breaking up for real, breaking up? Or are we breaking up with an idea or a sense of a version of ourselves, a version of a relationship that we've had before that we're thinking of? So just wanted to offer some other perspectives and ways of like thinking about sort of the breakup situation. So the last question, there's a lot going on in this last question, but let's reiterate this one. How do you manage when recovery/repair is not sincere, or healing frameworks are weaponized through passive aggressiveness, gaslighting, or quote unquote competitive healing? All right, so I'm really hearing this as like, the steps of recovery and repair. We're coming across some things happening, insincerity, like weaponizing of frameworks, passive aggressiveness, all of these things that are coming up in reaction to being held accountable, for instance. This is a really common experience that I've heard, and I've also experienced. This is when the things start to come up, to bubble up, right? And as a reminder, we're understanding accountability as that very definition, the ability to take into account what just happened. In the workbook, I also mentioned that in the process of asking for accountability, it is normalized that we tend to think and use accountability, misuse it as a pathway to have consequences be made, when that's actually not what accountability can potentially be used for. This is why I'm offering the restorative pathway of accountability, is to stop right there, and just in requesting accountability, that's pretty much all we're doing, is asking, can you take into account what just happened there? And so the next part of our holistic restorative cycle is to then go into a process of recovery and repair. In this question, how do you manage when recovery and repair and all these things are coming up? It can sound like in here that the ability to take into account what just happened results in these actions being made towards you. And during the lives, I did mention, because this question came up from a participant, is this when we really do need to pause and understand that recovery steps and repair are separate parts of the process. And to consider that once accountability is held, there may be a serious pause to be had so that we don't experience any of these reactions from the other. And so if this is what you might be experiencing, are these things coming at you, it's a good time to call for that pause and say like, hey, I notice these things are coming up now. I need to maybe think about what I need to get to recovering from this conversation, or like what's coming up now, to really get grounded back into what I'm going to need to recover and decide about the repair process. So, and for, letting a person know that maybe this is what you're seeing and sensing and feeling and hearing, being done in response to being held accountable, is just really requesting that the recovery doesn't happen together, but we go into our spaces privately or with some support and help outside of that relationship to kind of unpack it, right? Like, think about if these things are happening and a person is responding in these ways, there is something that they're needing that can happen in their own space and time to recover. And you as well are needing your own space and time and pause to understand what's happening at the moment. I really want to push for us to get used to pausing in this way, because it's been something that I've experienced a lot, and I witness a lot in interactions that involve an accountability process, is that we're still present in the dialogue, in the process, when we can actually just kind of take a pause and regroup with ourselves individually and privately to figure a way forward. And so addressing any of these reactions that are happening, it's a matter of let's separate ourselves for the moment to kind of figure out what we each individually need and what we can gather in what we're experiencing right now. So in one direction of this interaction, you're witnessing some of these reactions happening. How is that impacting you? What information is that giving you about your boundaries, your needs, your values to be in a healthy relationship with others? And for if this is something that is noticed or feedback is given about these reactions being received, weaponizing frameworks and things like that, whatever was said in this question, the passive aggressiveness, that's information for the person who is reacting that way to listen to that, to hear that is what is being experienced from you, and taking that and thinking about where you sit with all of that feedback and information, and what can be done as far as understanding someone's perspective on experiencing or witnessing that. This is the work of really unpacking the reactions, right? And so this last question around this is a good example of going through the restorative pathway that I mentioned in the workbook that leads to the triggers, right? So understanding how triggers work, that giving a response that may not be fit to the particular situation is a hard look back at yourself, right? It's really understanding, well, where did that come from? If that's impacting somebody negatively, what can I understand for myself in what they said? I'm being passive aggressive. I'm being reflected back that I've been gaslighting. Can I think about where that might be coming from, and if there's what I call trailheads to healing around that. All right. So again, going back to the definition of accountability is really the ability to take into account what just happened. Are you able to recall what just happened there? And if there's a response that has been received negatively, we need to take a pause and we need to listen. In the trigger mechanics that I describe in the workbook, I really talk about triggers being this sort of cord that's tethered to past experiences, past adverse experiences that have not been what I call metabolized, right, or processed through. So in some instances, we may react in ways that don't really fit the current situation, and we know that reaction may have come from something in the past. So that trigger will come up because it's a signal, it's a cord attached to the signal that says, oh, we're experiencing something again that's similar to that adverse event in the past. So here we are, boom, we're back in that past situation. And it doesn't have to be with the same person, but a remnant of that past situation gets triggered into the present moment, and we react the way that we reacted in the past. So our today reaction may not fit the circumstance, but it did fit what you needed to do in the past to protect yourself, right? Or whatever it was, to get back into safety, to like survive, right? So we want to pay attention to some of these reactions, and observe ourselves. Be willing to observe ourselves in what just happened there when we're being held accountable and some of these reactions come, and what's being reflected back to us is that these things are being experienced. To answer the question around the managing there is really looking at these situations and circumstances, and managing this relationship is really going back to those boundaries, right? Those parts of our safety that we need to have there in order to continue a relationship. And is it possible that we can request for these needs? And understanding, like, when, after we hold somebody accountable or request for that accountability, there may be a serious pause, and the conversation about recovery and repair needs to happen later. And so because the recovery needs to sit in its own container of safety, try that on, right? Try, what if I just first took a pause here instead of react or have a need to fix anything about this dialogue where accountability was requested. All right, I hope this helped anybody out there, and especially for those who contributed these notes into the Jamboard. Thank you so much for sharing and leaving yourselves vulnerable to this part of our work. Again, all of the information to keep in contact with me, subscribe to this channel because I'll be continuing responding to more of your questions and comments and offering as best I could support to move through. It is not an easy process to go through, and these are some of the toughest challenges we have in basically getting along and continuing the good work we do in our agencies, in our relationship, any of our work. Relationships are hard. Love is easy, right? So I hope this really gave you some insight and other things to try and other things to consider while we're navigating some of these really tough parts. Breaking up or making up, those are the challenges, right? So if any of this really helped you, please add in the comments, continue the conversation and dialogue. Stay close and keep up with some of the videos. Watch the other parts if you have not. Reach out to me, sign up for my newsletter, as I will be rolling out some deeper dive workshops to continue this work. And please consider bringing this restorative accountability into your relationships, whether that's with others, yourself, or your organization. See you next time.